Hey, what's up everybody? Cat King's here again for another fantastic and exciting video. In today's video, I want to do something a little bit different. I actually want to talk about how do you determine who to keep in your life. Now, this is a very complex situation, and there's multiple parts, and in no way am I going to be able to cover everything in one video. So if I leave out some things, which I will, let me know down in the comment section below. But the biggest thing here is I'm not going to be able to cover everything. And I know I already said that, but I have to stress that. Because if I did, this could span for hours upon hours and multiple parts. So the first thing, of course, is that a good friend will be happy with you when you're happy and empathize with you when you're sad. And this sounds simple, but there are people out there who genuinely want your demise. They get jealous of you, they get upset with you, they overall disrespect you and your happiness. They might envy you. And a good example of this is when people win the lottery. There's all these accounts where you see people win the lottery, and they have all these people come out of the woodworks who suddenly know them, try to rip them off, try to scam them, try to pull one over them. And then the loved ones go distance from them because they're like, that should have been me, or why you? Because it's a very selfish way of thinking. Their focus is very internalized. It's very focused on just themselves. And they're so caught up with the jealousy that they forget to think this person I love has had good fortune. And to the grief thing, they'll empathize with you. They don't want your downfall. They don't orchestrate anything like that. They don't try to character assassinate you. They genuinely want the best for you. So the next thing becomes, well, pay attention if they're talking about other people. Pay attention how often they're talking about other people as well. And most importantly, you have to be able to ask yourself, are they staying in regular contact with these people? What type of relationship do they have with the people they're talking about? And are the criticisms valid? Because what I've seen can happen is, if they're talking about people who you know to be a good person, then that might reflect on them. And how often are they talking about it? Do they find themselves in drama and trouble all the time? That could be an indicator that they might be a problematic individual. It's also a good indicator of whether or not you should divulge secrets to them as well. Because if you find that they're talking about sensitive topics about other people, then chances are they may do the same about you. Another big one I found is that some of them will actually weaponize psychology terms, and they'll turn things around on you and make you feel crazy. Now, a good one that's important is I've seen narcissists, yes, but also many other types of people who don't have to be narcissists. Use the terms like you're crazy, or I didn't say that, or, etc., which is a form of gaslighting. And they do this to not own up to accountability for themselves, and because they want the other person to to feel what they're feeling in that moment. It's a lack of self-awareness at best, and at worst, it's a deliberate attempt to avoid any self-reflection and change that might help improve the quality of the relationships that they're having. Now, we always talk about red flags, but I'd also like to talk about green flags and yellow flags. So let's go ahead and start about what red flag is. So typically a red flag would be, we'll use the stoplight. So a red flag is, this is it, no matter what, this is a deal breaker. So for me personally, a red flag would be cheating, right? Obviously. If my partner cheats on me, it's done for. But everybody has different red flags, and cheating can mean different things for everybody, right? A lot of things are open to interpretation. This doesn't just apply to cheating. This could apply to a breach of etiquette. This could apply to a breach of trust, etc. And everybody's red flags are different as well, as I mentioned. So it's important when you're with somebody, whether it be a family member or a friend, to establish your red flags really early on in your boundaries. It'll do a number of things. Of course, the most important thing first is that it will set a clear indication that you are to be respected, or else there will be no further avenue. It also leaves no guesswork. If you tell somebody you're not okay with something, it doesn't leave it open to interpretation later. Well, I thought this would be fine. Have you ever heard that one before? I thought it would be fine if I did this or did that or blah, blah. Well, this can be avoided if you state your boundaries way ahead of time. And as mentioned back to the previous point about gaslighting, this helps prevent gaslighting, and this helps prevent other forms of manipulation as well. I think this is also equally important because it allows you a chance to see how the person reacts to your boundaries. Are they respectful? Are they understanding and compassionate? Or do they respond violently and with aggression? The next thing, of course, that I'd like to add are what I'd call yellow flags. And this should be to proceed with caution. So, a good example of a yellow flag for me personally is if somebody is being, they're being kind of suspicious. And what I mean is they're hiding their phone. Now, there could be a number of reasons, which is why it's important to be mature and understanding and ask them why. And that's also another thing, is trust is important in a relationship. So yellow flags can mean that this is a deal breaker, but it doesn't always mean it, because there is a lot of leeway. Whereas with somebody who cheated on me, I already know definitively what they did, and I know I'm not going to get over it, and there's no talking about it. With yellow flags, it's more like, okay, why did this happen? Is this a bad thing in the first place? Am I overreacting? What's their side of the story? Let's look at their past and determine if this is something that needs to be brought up, etc. So for me, I'd be like, hey, I noticed you hide your phone a lot or you put it face down. I'd really like to talk about that and see what's going on. Of course, the first thing you'll see is the reaction, which is one of the biggest, one of the most important telling signs. And with the reaction, you can sort of go from there whether or not you see suspicion. But truth be told, even with somebody's reaction, there are studies that show we're only as good as regular chance when determining deception. Along with this, it also helps to look at their past. Are they getting into trouble? Back to the previous point of what's their past. And the reason that past is so important, even though people would like to say it's not, is because it's one of the only things when we're getting to know somebody that we have to determine what is the future predictor of how they're going to behave. Because what we can see is a repeated history of something usually indicates that this is going to be an issue later on. It's one of the things when we look at people with violent criminal records, we see they're often repeat offenders. And once they commit a crime once, we can usually determine that they'll commit another crime. Maybe not the same specific crime, but nonetheless another crime. So looking at their past can be really important too. Now, of course, there are green flags. So a big one for me with my partner is, and green flags are, go ahead. All clear. For the moment. Maybe you'll come into a yellow flag or a red flag later, but for now, it's all clear. No stop signs. And so for the green flag, this would be, for me, my partner makes me dinner after work. My partner will give me cuddles and reassure me when I'm having a panic attack. My partner is very loving and attentive to my needs. And these are all really important. And it shows compassion and empathy. Because here's the question that you have to ask yourself. When you think you can stick something out or rough something out, can you do it for 5 years? Can you do it for 10 years? Can you do it for 20 years? I'm not here to convince you whether or not to stay with a friend or partner or family member or whatever the relationship may be, whatever the friendship may be, whatever anything may be. I'm not here to tell you whether or not you should stay with certain people or keep them in your life. But what I think it is important to do is to value that your time is not going to be given back. It's a non-refundable currency, and the time you spend on other people is forever gone. So make sure that you spend it wisely. And we say opposites attract, and I definitely think this is important. And it's a good point. You need to have somebody who's different to some level. But it's also important to have somebody who's similar and holds the same values, at least on the important topics. So, for example, some of the major reasons that marriages fail, of course, is finances. That's one of the biggest ones. Is your partner as financially responsible as you? Are you as financially responsible as your partner? What type of goals do you have financially? This, whether it be a friend as well when you're keeping in their life. Do you guys have the same goals? Do you guys elevate each other? And then, of course, what's also important is, what is your social circle like? Do you share mutual friends? Because this is a good indicator of whether or not you'll stay with somebody or whether or not they'll be around you. So one of the major reasons people divorce is usually, or whether or not they stay with somebody, is due to social influence, particularly amongst their friends and peers. So typically what we see is a friend say, dump that guy or girl, they're trash. It's a huge influencer, but they say, you have all these family ties and stuff. Stay with them. And speaking of ties, you also have to ask yourself, when you have a friend or a family member or a loved one, when you have them in your life, what happens if you cut them off? Maybe it's time that you say you absolutely need to cut them off. Okay, well, how's this going to affect you legally? If you get a divorce, how's this going to affect you? How's this going to affect the family? Have you talked to everybody? How's this going to affect your social group? How is this going to affect work if you guys work together? You need to plan this before acting irrationally. Because what I see a lot is that a couple will divorce or family members will stop talking to each other, and then there's a lot of inner turmoil. And you also have to ask yourself, are you prepared for, if you're dealing with a narcissist specifically, but not just exclusively, character assassination? So character assassination is what will happen when you cut out somebody who's particularly toxic in your life. And they will begin to go around and slander you. And they'll say, that dude was a piece of shit. Or, for example, let's say you have an ex and they start going and talk about you and say you were a piece of shit, you were abusive, blah, blah, blah. One of the best tools to handle this is to let your friends, other family members, etc. know what's going on, what's about to go down. And once you let those people know, that's when you handle the conversation. You are not going to convince them that they're wrong, more than likely, especially if they're of the narcissistic personality. You are not going to prove anything to them. You might want them to have, what I see a lot of times actually is people come into this and they think, I'm going to get them to have this aha moment. They're going to suddenly realize all the pain and anguish they caused me, and I'm going to make them feel, at least in some part, the way they've made me feel countless times, and they're going to feel guilt and shame. And the truth is, more than likely, that they're aware of what they're doing, and they've seen it. You've probably already told them that they've hurt you countless times, so I'm not sure what makes you think that this time in particular it's going to get through to them. Perhaps it's that you're really setting your foot down, and you're really being extra super duper serious this time. But it's not that they're upset that they've hurt you. They're upset that there's now actual real world consequences that they're going to have to deal with. I'd also like you to consider, if you're with a partner, are you going to raise a family? And if so, what are your parenting styles? Have you worked through any childhood issues? What I see a lot is that an individual will have abusive history. And because of that abusive history, they will take that and they will carry on that learned behavior from a young childhood, and they will enact some of those same characteristics that they learned as a child onto their children. And this is a cycle of abuse that continues on through generations. So it's important to ask, have you both worked out your baggage? Not just in that for parenting styles, but how you handle relationships. That sort of segues into the next thing, which is healthy coping mechanisms. How does the person that you have, partner, family, friend, handle stress? How do they handle tragic events? What is their approach to that? Do they white knuckle stuff? Or do they plan for it, and are they organized? And if they're not, how can you help them get to that point? Do they have resistance to it? And listen, I'm a big advocate of mental health awareness. But what I see, unfortunately, sometimes is that mental illness is almost used by a select group of people. Everybody's met at least one of those people. And if you haven't, then you're very fortunate not to. But I have myself have seen... Hold on. Sorry about that. I myself have seen that there is a select special type of individual who will weaponize their illness. And what they'll do is when they have an outburst, instead of just saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, that was wrong, I know I need to do better," and actually doing better and showing that they're going to do better, they'll say, "I'm sorry I yelled, it's just that when you do this," or "it's just that," or "but," or blah, 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 or "I'm sorry, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just such a piece of shit," and they'll play a pity party guilt trip, "Woe is me, I'm so sad, look at me," and they'll say all these little things without actually changing or addressing the issue at all. And then what they'll do is they'll love bomb you. And this is, a deadly toxic cycle that happens with abuse victims. They do something terrible to you, and then they shower you with love and affection the next couple of days. And the reason this is so effective is because what happens is the individual is starved for affection. So when they get it, it's such a huge hit. It's such a huge rush because they have been deprived of it for so long that any little amount just feels incredible. It's a rare effect, right? So the rarer something is, the more valuable our brains perceive it to be, even if, in fact, that there is no inherent value to it. Even if something isn't technically rare, like let's take diamonds for example, they're not all that valuable, but because they're so scarce, our brains perceive them to have the value they are, even though the actual real-world value of what they should cost is nowhere near that. It's just that they're scarce in the world. They're not rare, but they are scarce. Do you know what I mean by the difference? So when you get this affection from this person, because it's so sparse and in between, so spaced out, it's a lot more intense than if you were to get it on a consistent basis. Which almost subconsciously allows the abuse victim to subconsciously permiss the abuse they just received because they're in the good stage. Inevitably, it all comes back around, and that's why it's called a cycle. Of course, we've talked about the people they associate with before, but it's important to also explain it a little more. So people are influenced is nature versus nurture. There's natural factors, but there's also nurturing factors. So a good study that was documented was this boy who was in the wilderness, and they tried to bring him into civilization and teach him on how to speak and everything. And even though they tried and they did some things, they were never able to get the boy to the right level of being able to speak. He was never able to adapt fully as somebody who was brought up from a young age like us, from childhood, from birth till now. So we also have to look at what, the past, we talk about that, but what was it like being raised up? And furthermore, the nature versus nurture thing goes into what types of people are they grown up around? Because it's not just them that we can use to determine. You are who you're around a lot of times. And that's not to say that you're going to be exactly like that person. Sometimes good people get involved with bad people who are taking advantage of them. But what you can determine is they're at an increased likelihood to develop some of the traits of the people they're around, as previously mentioned. So it's important to look at those other individuals that are around and to bring up a serious conversation. Maybe they're not aware, maybe they're gullible. It could be that the people they're around show themselves a different side than they know. So it's important to be like, "Hey, did you know this? I'd really like to talk to you about this." And if they're not willing to change, then perhaps it's time to have a more serious conversation with yourself on where you want to go next and whether or not you want to pursue this avenue of friendship, love, whatever, with this person. Now, another thing that we should consider is how much of an effort are they putting into seeing you or talking to you. So what I see sometimes is it's a very one-sided affair, right? In the sense of either you're putting in all the effort, you're trying to hang out with them, you're trying to talk to them, and somebody who's genuinely interested if you ask them, hey, you're free to hang out, they'll say, well, I'm busy today, but we could, and then they'll follow up with something and they'll make an active effort, be like, we could also do this day or that day. But if somebody who's not really interested, they'll find a million different excuses, and these range on the levels of absurdity. So you have to pay attention. But the more obvious ones that I've personally seen are, well, my dog's really sick, and it turns out that they've used this before, or their dog's not really sick, they just believe it to be permissible. We also see this with students sometimes where the dog chewed up my homework, or I saw this one interview with the sociopath, Special Books by Special Kids, I believe it was, where he just on the fly said his dog was in the hospital, sick, and that's why he showed up late to class, I believe it was. And then he said that he didn't have a dog at all. So that was really interesting to me. Sorry, I said sociopath, but antisocial personality disorder. I apologize, I used outdated terminology. But you also have to pay attention to when, how often are you the one initiating conversations? How often are you the one initiating text talks? How often are you trying to hang out? And then you have to look at whether or not they're hanging out with you. Now, a hard thing to swallow is it may not be personal. It may not be that they have a vendetta against you, they dislike you or anything like that. It may just be that they value their time, or maybe they just see other things as doing better. Maybe they just don't feel like talking to you in specific, and it has nothing to do with your character quality. You just might not be the first priority they have in their life. Maybe not even the third or fifth, but don't take it personal. The worst thing that can happen is if you jump right to that. Maybe it is personal, but jumping right to that can make things really awkward if it's something else. So you have to ask yourself, and maybe even have a conversation with them. Strip, hey, I really value our friendship, and I really like to keep you in my life. But I feel as if you're not really interested in maintaining the quality of friendship or relationship that I'd also like. And see how they respond to you. And go from there. We live in a day of social media where it's also equally important to determine, and we can look at, I think we've all seen it before, where somebody says they're busy, and then you see them later on social media posting, killing it up. Maybe they ignore your messages and they start posting on Facebook stuff. And it's equally important to keep in mind that. So, how much time are you spending on these individuals when there are other individuals who clearly would be better suited for your time and who value your time, and they show it by reaching out to you just as much, or at least around the same amount, as you do to them. So maybe your time is better spent elsewhere.